good morning, everybody. Today we have Joanna Evans for Wonderland Book Club. Sinai Unhinged is the book that we are discussing today at Wonderland Book Club. And we're so excited to have Joanna, who's also a member of Wonderland Book Club. To begin, this is a organization that is affiliated with the North Carolina Writers Network. I'm Alice Osborne. I am the Wake County Regional Rep for the North Carolina Writers Network, which right now we're having a online conference, and that's pretty exciting right now. And I'm going to be helping with a couple classes tomorrow. With COVID, we can't have our traditional in-person conferences, but the Writers Network is doing a wonderful job keeping everything going, but in a safe, socially distanced way. We are apart, but still together, just like we are today at Wonderland Book Club. A little bit of review. We have been online via Zoom since April, but normally we would meet at Quail Ridge Books. And speaking of Quail Ridge Books, you can get a copy of any of the books on our list for a 22% discount. And our next book is Leslie Tall Manning's Knock on Wood, which is available Kindle and also in real book form. Quail Ridge has some copies available, and I sent out a survey about a month ago to see if who would get the book. But they may have some copies available for you, and that will be Friday, December 4th. This will be our last Zoom Wonderland Book Club of the year right here at Zoom, Friday, December 4th. And I will punch that into the chat once we get going. So Leslie Tall Manning, this will be her 4th or 5th time at Wonderland Book Club. She was here last November, so it's been a year since she's been back. All right, so we've got Joanna here, and a little bit about Joanna. She grew up in Michigan, so just like Tracy. Hey. And as you might suspect, she was an early reader at a young age, like many of us here today. Her wild imagination led her led her 6th grade teacher to encourage her to become a writer. That's awesome. I was encouraged in the 4th grade, so yeah. But she wanted to be like Dr. Joyce Brothers, and she after completing her master's in social work from the University of Michigan, she moved to North Carolina and is now leading a successful career as a psychotherapist for adults and children with specific expertise in trauma treatment. But her love for books and writing, it never left her. Inspired by Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, Gary Zukav's The Dancing Woolly Masters, and other ancient spiritual and religious texts, she became fascinated with particle physics, the purpose of life, and the need for a story that illustrated how entwined we all are. And that led to her writing and speaking today about Sinai Unhinged. In her spare time, she and her husband can be found traveling up and down the southeast coast in any season, even in the hot and steamy summer. And she has a website, which I will also put in the chat. It's joannaevanswriter.com. Well, thank you, Joanna, and I'm going to give the floor to you right now.
Yay, thank you for having me, and thank you for putting this together. Hello, I know some familiar faces. This is my first time doing this, so I'm kind of winging it. I'll introduce myself, some of my work, my book a little bit, then I'd like to hear about you. And then we'll kind of switch back and forth with some more information about Sinai and the background behind it, and then maybe read a snippet of it. So, as Alice said, I am a therapist in Cary, and before, I have a private practice now, but before I did that, I used to work for Wake County. They provided mental health services, and I worked there for almost 20 years doing child mental health in a regular child mental health treatment program and in a sexual abuse treatment program. But Wake County decided to no longer offer mental health services, so I just do this full time. And then simultaneously, I got the inspiration, who knows how this stuff comes up, maybe circled back to the writing as a child, that was encouraged and I loved to do. And I would write stories in elementary school that my 6th grade teacher would read in front of the class, much to my horror. You don't want like that kind of attention, but you do want that kind of attention because it ended up fostering what I guess might be a skill of some sort. So I have two works, Sinai Unhinged, which we'll get to in a moment, but also Sinai Unhinged is kind of dark and it's a thriller and it's a little scary and it's deep thinking. And just to let you know that I do have some balance and some lighter side, I also have written one of those Hallmark style holiday screenplays, like a Christmas screenplay called A Crystal Christmas. And it was actually optioned by a production company in Los Angeles. It's actually had movies on Netflix and Lifetime. Of course, this happened in January, right? I get an actual screenplay option, and then like COVID hits and everything shuts down. So I don't know. I'll keep my fingers crossed for like something moving forward. We actually, I mean, they did actually in the summer have, this is sidebar stuff, but like one of these Zoom meetings with a bunch of actors, and it was a read through and there was a director. So I'm like encouraged that maybe one day but I just want you to keep that in mind because Sinai's like the polar opposite. So, so it has some balance. What Sinai is about. Lethal experiments at a particle physics complex drive scientists insane and plunge their therapist headlong into a frightening and dangerous search for the truth and a fight for her life. You know, it's a thriller, action-packed, not literary, you know, like commercial fiction kind of style. I find that people either love it or they don't, because maybe it's like too science heavy or too something. Just skim over the science part. If like, I mean, don't want to offend anybody whose books I've written or read, but I skim over the stuff that I don't like. So you don't have to like get stuck on the science, but because it's in a particle physics complex, partly I felt I had to set the stage. I had to describe some of it. So yeah, but it is action packed, and it depends how nerdy you are. You might really like the science stuff and the deep thinking stuff. So in terms of reading more about, I'll just read the back jacket blurb to kind of summarize what occurs in it. As the cries of a volatile patient in the psychiatric ward of Sinai General haunt therapist Alexandra Kraig, she realizes something terrifying has happened at the complex. Mistakes have occurred there, mistakes that have changed him. When Alex's closest friend, also a scientist, I'm sorry, I love that picture. Alice, your mask picture. Sorry, I was distracted. Do you see that? Sorry. When Alex's closest friend, also a scientist at the complex, develops deeply disturbing behavior, she becomes determined to uncover the truth about the particle physics experiment hidden deep within the complex walls, a project her missing father warned her against many years before. With her friend on the brink of madness, Alex resurrects her father's research, infiltrates the complex, and races to halt the experiment's destructive force. But a dark element has another plan, hijacking the system, intensifying an already looming catastrophe, and propelling the complex towards implosion. With time running out, Alex joins forces with the very scientists that created this monstrous experiment. Battling the enemy and the machine, Alex faces a ticking clock as she struggles to find the answers buried somewhere in her father's secrets, an answer she desperately needs if she is to save her own life and the lives of thousands more. So there you go. There you go. That's like kind of the setup of it. And now maybe it would be a good time to do introductions of everybody.
Or I was going to say, if you could, Joanna, talk about how before introductions, we could say, what inspired the book? What were the elements that inspired the main character? And how did Alex come to be? How did Valerie come to be? How did I'm sorry, I got all the Carl. I get a lot of C's. Carl, Carson. How did they come to be? And the science is magnificent, and it's about. Leslie Tall Manning did a book called Maggie's Dream, which was also about the collective consciousness. And
I
I was really, really, the dark forces all around us. And if you could talk a little bit about that too, because that's a big theme of your book about being kind to each other and how love wins.
Right. And I loved in writing this, I was able to use some epigraphs in there from, there's four, like the Bible, Buddha, and then one from Carl Jung, and which he speaks to the, definitely the collective consciousness, and one from Einstein. And all of those, I kind of stuck those in there to kind of preface like that whole, like we're all intertwined, and remember that, and that things are all connected. And really, I mean, my personal belief is there's not necessarily evil people, it's evil energy, and everybody's got good, it's what kind of energy you choose to emit at any time, and to kind of remember that balance when you're dealing with people, and that the energy you can be emitting that's negative, you might think is harming somebody else, but it's going to end up circling back to you because we are so intertwined in that way. I mean, Alex, so it's partly write what you know. So Alex is a therapist. She works at a psychiatric hospital, but I needed to make that connection. So there's also some characters who work at the particle physics complex. I thought, CERN, people are familiar with CERN in Switzerland and their experiments. Those are just so fascinating. And I used to like search high and low for, can I find a thriller why isn't there a movie or a thriller that's sort of set and that exciting? Because so many bad things can happen there. And I couldn't find one that was Dan Brown's, maybe Angels and Demons. I think it started out there and like left. I'm like, oh, well, that was disappointing. I wanted to spend more time in a particle physics complex. I thought it was exciting. And spiritual, like I would read lots of spiritual text and new agey kind of stuff, and like, or the Dead Sea Scrolls, or like the Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, like all of that metaphysical sort of stuff, and just wanted to make a work that would illustrate all of these important points, because I think people seek out those books if they're already interested, right? They're already aware of it and they're already interested, but I wanted to kind of make something that would introduce new people to those philosophies who maybe hadn't been exposed to that before. So that's part of it. Try to remember some of your other questions about
The characters of Carl and Lena, and the where did they come from, because they were so sharp, and realistic. Your writing is just it leaps from the page. It feels like we're really right in your mind, and there's really no distance between the author and the reader. It just feels like we're experiencing exactly what the characters are experiencing.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. Because this is
the first
thing I've ever written. So yay.
Yay.
So, and I'd love to say there's like a great insightful answer where the characters came from, but I'm not really sure. Like the name Lena, for example, is like not necessarily a name that I like, but like it just, that's just what she was called and just how she emerged. And of course, I needed some characters where trouble would happen, right? So, but wanted to make it like meaningful, like, so Carl has a close connection to her so that it would be meaningful for why is she so driven to uncover what's going on for real. And along the way in learning to write, like trying to figure out how to write it all, how to write a novel, how to plot a novel, how to develop a novel, I would get critiques and things at different writing conferences. And one of the persons was like, make a father, like, and that's, she has this missing father who was a particle physics person, and she wanted to go into that at first until just some bad experiences and that he's gone. And so that's kind of like the connection for how she knows so much about it, and how she also kind of is aware that this could be dangerous for her to be for these experiments to be going on. Yeah, and I mean, Valerie's one of the there's two scientists, a real particle physics complex has like thousands of people, but it was pretty impractical to do that. So I've just got a handful of scientists, and the two other main ones besides Carl, her friend, are Holden and Valerie. And I think they're pretty formal names in terms. I initially was very focused on names, and I'm looking up in baby names books, and it's like I'd have some symbolism. I forgot what Holden meant, but like might mean rock or hidden or something. And then I just started picking names randomly later on. But Holden meant something. I should have looked it up ahead of time, but there was a reason I picked Holden Raider, because he's the head of the complex, and he's kind of got his own issues, a little arrogant, narcissistic. His wife had died at the particle physics complex years before in an accident, which like plummeted his business and his research and ruined his reputation. And he's been scrambling to get back up while he aligned himself with this shady person, you know, some international shady figure with a lot of money and a lot of connections. And now he regrets it. So he's pressured to get the research done and going and get this person out of his hair. But at the same time, it becomes obvious that it's not going the way that he wants it to go. Valerie's the other female physicist, and she lines up with Alex to try to help eventually. She's not on board at first. She's very abrupt and abrasive, but she eventually aligns with Alex so that they could figure the whole thing out.
And I know that you had to also portray a pretty big bad, which you do with Kiernan. And that was, you successfully, it wasn't just him, but it was also, his boss. So I wanted to see how your antagonist evolved too.
Well, right. So he was a lot of fun, and I would write him and scenes that he would do and things that he would do. It's very disturbing. And then I'd read it later on, like, I'm like, whoo, wow, I wrote that. That's kind of gross, but okay. That's just what he's doing. Partly, but I like him. I don't know why. I mean, I have a soft spot for like him, even though I don't think I'd want to be alone with him if he was a real person. But I don't know how many people watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but Spike in Buffy was like my favorite. And he's a vampire, and he had a bad attitude, and he was not the nicest vampire, but sometimes he could have a tender side, right? And like do the right thing. And he was just sort of my inspiration in terms of Kieran, thinking about Kieran in a good way, or maybe where Kieran might go one day if there's future works. Yeah. So, and then it felt like The Voice is the name of the, I don't know the word, but like the funding source that's internationally connected. And I just wanted to make somebody mysterious and very powerful and very, hidden, like behind the scenes, to not interfere and just not have too many characters that were too involved and muddy up the plot, but also to have some sort of way that puts pressure on Holden for, why would you proceed with something that's obviously not going well?
Yeah, all your plot points really made sense with the motivation, and it was very clear that, and but yeah, I mean, we're thinking, okay, Carl, he's the main antagonist, but it's not. He is doing some horrible things, and
right. But he's so like part of it too. Back to the more about why I would write it. And I actually have two like things that I'll share that tie in, but what's particle physics for, right? Why I'm not even sure why they do some of their experiments, but there is a reason. And part of it is understanding the universe, certainly, which is sort of akin to knowing the mind of God, right? Like, so what if there was an accident that actually somehow connected them to understanding the secrets of the universe? Now we're just humans, so we would only understand a limited small portion, but the accident at the facility kind of gives the people a taste, and not such a good way, of knowing the mind of God. And Carl is doing some bad things, but he's got that distorted perception. Like it's not coming. He's got twisted thinking very much because he thinks he's protecting somebody, but he's not. But he's not thinking clearly. Anybody who's involved in the accident doesn't end up thinking very clearly. At the end, yeah. So Stephen Hawking, right? Like at the back in his conclusion to A Brief History of Time, he says, so if they discover the complete theory, which is the laws that rule our world up here three-dimensionally are not consistent with the laws that rule things subatomically. So if they ever get a complete theory, he says, it should be understandable and broad principle by everyone, not just a few scientists. Then we shall all, philosophers, scientists, and just ordinary people, be able to take part in the discussion of the question of why is it that we and the universe exist. If we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God. Yeah, so that's, one of the sort of thoughts behind why Sinai Unhinged came to be.
Cool. Well, I like to open it up for questions from our group, and if you can introduce yourself before you state your question for Joanna, that'd be awesome. Who would like to jump in? And you can unmute yourself and just go.
Well, Joanne, I don't have a lot of questions, but I must say that this was absolutely thrilling from beginning to end. Stephen, and well, all the particle physics I know I learned from Sheldon Cooper on Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
Real good. And the scary parts were really scary. I'm terribly claustrophobic. And when you went down that escalator and down that elevator until the bowels, I was terrified. I said, they're going to get lost down in there. You did a wonderful job of pulling all that together. I did want to ask you one thing, though. You almost had a relationship going between Alex or Lexi and Holt. Where is that going to go? Are we going to see a sequel to this?
I would like a sequel to this, and I think there would be more development of that. My idea, so for if my next two books, I've written a little, maybe 60 pages of the next book, but I've not gotten very far for just a bunch of logistic reasons. The next book would have to do with other dimensions, because they think they can mathematically prove that they think there are other dimensions. So I would have something to do with the spirit world and ghosts and good and evil in that way with other dimensions, and there would be more of that. And then a third book, if I ever got there, was going to be about a plague, which just this is totally put a damper on the idea of a plague right now. So I'm not even gonna. Yeah.
Well, you had another character that I found interesting, and I need you to develop her some more for me, is Edmund. She was an awful person, but where did her character go?
Yeah, so she would make recurrent appearances because I think she would have something to do with some of the bad things going on in the just in general in the hospital, and maybe there's some connections she has that we don't currently know about in this book, but yeah, so there would be more, right? Yeah.
Well, she was an interesting character, and we need to know more about her. You really have a dark side with Kieran. He is. Ooh.
Yes,
well developed, but
well, I read a lot of horror. I feel like my teenage years, I was partially raised by Stephen King, because I was read every single book and he had so many coming out all the time, so that helped, right? But I know, like I said, I would read stuff and I go, ooh, what was wrong with you that day?
I did too. Well, thank you. Good.
You're welcome. And just to touch on your claustrophobic point too, I know, I think these are hundreds of feet below the Earth's surface. I mean, I get if I go tour a cave, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky or something, I'm anxious, right? And these people work down there every day. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Well, you're giving me chills just talking about it now. Icky.
Joanna, I just was going to ask you, you're talking about a sequel, and when you have written something as intense as this book is, do you have any trepidation about writing something else to come along behind it with that intensity?
Right. Like you put some pressure on yourself, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, can I do it again? Can I keep it up? And you don't want to, you know how sometimes sequels fall flat or just aren't as fulfilling as the first one. So yeah, there would be some concern, especially since I feel like I'm relatively new at this, but I worked for years on getting Sinai just right. So it might take a long time for another book, but I would hopefully have the same dedication or perfectionism. I'm not sure what that would be, but yeah.
Well, you have a fascinating background in terms of metaphysics and then therapy, and it's just kind of a match made in heaven for this type of book. It's
Well,
great.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for what you've presented to us. There's more of a direct connection than most of us probably realize between the subject you are toying with, at least for your next book, your sequel,
Right.
and the subatomic world that was part of the focal point of your first one. I worked in a particle physics lab when I was a very young man. I actually wasn't particle physics, it's related discipline, it's high energy physics. And one of the things they explained was, okay, you can take something like glass, for example, and using what they learned in high energy physics, you can reformulate the subatomic properties of it and produce Corelware, which has, you can bake with Corelware where you can't with ordinary glass. It's not shatterproof, but it's harder for it to break, and so forth. So you can modify properties that way. You get down to particle physics. You're looking at, okay, does God gamble? It's a question that Einstein had when they started introducing these different levels of energy that electrons would jump from into. And so forth. It's astounding metaphysical and teleological issues you start dealing with that as an entryway into it. And I wish you well in your next production.
Thank you. Well, that's cool that you did that kind of work. And right, at that deep subatomic level, there's the boundaries you can't really tell the boundaries, right? And it's sort of indivisible, and there isn't a separation, right? So yeah, I wanted that to kind of represent us in the story. Yeah.
Einstein didn't think there was as much a separation as other physicists like Niels Bohr did, but each one turns out to have laid a foundation on which people like Stephen Hawking have built. And we're still not there as far as producing a unified theory. The scientists amongst us are still baffled by much that's been discovered in how to unify these theories and these knowledge of these various forces. And again, the spirit realm has its place, and you are toying with high energy experiences there as well. I wish you well protecting yourself as you toy with them.
So that's part of my actual drawback that I didn't say out loud is it's a little freaky thinking about what you would have to write about and describe. It can be, a little disturbing, and but.
May I ask you a very personal question? Are you a believer?
Yes.
Okay, a Christian believer, perhaps?
Right, yes.
Very good. Let me offer you a quick prayer that you may find useful as you start toying with these various forces. In the name of Jesus Christ and the power of God Almighty, get behind me. I had the experience of having to be exorcised of demons years ago.
Oh no, okay, right.
And during the interval between when I first discovered this was a need and the actual completion, which it took several visits to the minister that was successful with that, he gave me that as a way to defend myself.
Oh, okay. That was
Walls
very
and doors,
touching. Right.
walls and doors, physical properties such as you're dealing with in subatomic physics and particle physics, they don't have any influence on spirit beings, and words and phrases like that, prayers like that, that have little or no influence on us, have an influence on them, kind of like wind on smoke.
That's cool. Thank you very much.
So,
It's very touching when you
many
said that
blessings.
prayer thing. Yeah.
Many, many blessings.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think the whole idea of several realities is fascinating. And in these current political times, I mean, while I was reading your book, unbelievably, I kept thinking of our current political situations because there's so much of it now. But I kept thinking of the different realities, how my brother sees life in one way and I see it in a totally different way. And then sometimes my daughter and I, one of my daughters and I have talked about our dreams are so real, which kind of reminds me of Maggie's dream, but are so real that sometimes we wonder, could there be an alternate life we're living and we're just not aware of it? The whole idea of these different realities is fascinating and, of course, non-understandable.
Right, to our little minds, but it's fascinating to think about, right? And doesn't it feel like 2020, we sort of like jumped into a different timeline than we were in before? So weird. Yeah.
Joanna, can you talk a little bit about choosing to set your story in North Carolina and especially Western North Carolina?
Right, which I actually don't 100% know if it could really, if North Carolina's ground, geologically deep enough to be able to hold a particle physics complex, underground like they can in Switzerland, but I just went with it. I almost asked, but then I'm like, whatever. It's just like, why? I don't really want to move it out of North Carolina. Like, that was familiar to me. It just felt comfortable to be able to write more of a setting about North Carolina than try to put it somewhere out west that I was unfamiliar with, or in another country that I was unfamiliar with. So yeah, that's why I did that. And I did not, obviously, therapist, had no background really other than maybe like high school or college classes in science. So I emailed CERN, didn't think that I would necessarily I was hoping to get help, but didn't know what they would actually say. But they connected me with John Huth, who's the Donner Professor of Particle Physics at Harvard, who's worked on CERN and just was like a lifesaver in being able to create sort of a realistic particle physics complex. And he was so helpful and responsive, and like, I don't know what he does. Like, I would email him. I'm like, you have better things to do. I know you do. Because I would email him and it'd be like 3 minutes later, he'd reply. I'm like, you must have other things to do than answer my random questions. But that helped in creating the complex.
Cool. Folks, what other questions do you have from the group for Joanna?
Well, I have my typical question.
All right, Tracy,
Joanna,
I think Robin has a question, and then I'm going to bounce right back to you, Tracy, okay?
Oh, okay.
Robin, can you unmute yourself?
I thought that, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Usually when I read a book, I'll focus on the characters, but lately I've been getting into looking for influences of a sense of place and the setting, and really diving into how much certain authors go into describing the areas, the environment, the ambiance in terms of more than just visual. And I'd like to ask you, when you were writing this book, and obviously you wanted people to get a sense of a facility and a corporate, what did you edit out, and what did you feel important to keep in so that people can really be a part of your story and find themselves falling into that place?
Right, right. So I wrote Sinai Unhinged first, and then later I decided to try to write the screenplay. If I had known, if I'd done it, if I realized what was going on, I might have written Sinai Unhinged as a screenplay, because as I was writing it, it's like a movie in my head, you know? So I would write what I saw and what I experienced. And there was a lot of science in general and things that in the complex that I ended up deleting just because it felt like it would be too much, too heavy, not necessarily relevant to the storyline, would slow things down, would kind of went on a tangent. It was that kind of stuff. So I tried to keep it just enough so that people would understand the setting, like you said, and where they were and what was going on and what was happening location wise. Some of the offices, for example, or the rooms or the scenes were also to reflect either a personality of the whether it's the hospital, you know, there's personalities for these places, right? Like, so the personality of the hospital, the personality of Alex's office, those were one certain separate things. There's a forensic hospital for the criminally insane that one of the characters goes to, that has a definite personality, and you know, so describing a setting like that. And the same thing for the complex itself, how that felt and looked, and how the different characters' offices might look in terms of reflecting their own personality. Because everybody, you know, you decorate your office, right? And or don't decorate it, but either way, that's a reflection of who you are, right?
Yes.
So hope that helps a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Tracy, go ahead with your question. It's, I know you're gonna, what it is.
Do you want to ask it?
No, go ahead.
So Joanna, sorry I didn't read your book, but just thinking about, you know, my background's in psychology too. And so when you talk about Jung,
Right.
we're living in such an archetypal time right now. Everything seems like a trope and a stereotype.
Right. Oh, she froze. Maybe she'll unfreeze.
Yeah. So what Tracy is going to ask you is, what were your favorite?
All the shadow and I'm thinking, I don't.
You froze for a second. Maybe you'll have to repeat it. Or did she freeze again?
Yeah, she froze. She's going to ask you what your favorite sentences that you wrote in your book.
Oh, right. So that's a great question. One, of course, I came unprepared for. And you know how you write something, you're like, I can't remember any of it right now. I know my favorite sentence is not the one that I wrote. It's the opening one by Carl Jung. Because I felt it set up just the whole mystery of the puzzle of the complex and what might be going on there, really the mystery of us as humans, where he says, as a child, I felt myself to be alone, and I am still, because I know things and must hint at things which others apparently know nothing of, and for the most part do not want to know. So I thought that was just interesting and powerful. I do like the one where it's something about like, oh, why don't I have it handy? Something about the fear oozing down, settle. Maybe I'll try to find it. So, it's
Joanna, I liked when you were describing things, your similes and your metaphors. I like the one where she asked, like she was asking the clerk at the drugstore for a prescription, or thanking the drug, thanking after she got her prescription. Do you remember that one?
No, I don't. Right.
It was really good.
That was really good. Like that one. It's like I could look it up, but I hate to like click away and make you look up, because I want to be able to Oh, I know where I can find it. Because I had some posted on Instagram. There you go.
All right. Tracy, did I ask your question right? You probably had other things to say.
Yeah, am I frozen still?
You're not frozen now. You're good now.
It's very strange because I'm right by the whatever.
Yeah, I know, right?
But no, I just like to ask authors that question because sometimes words come to us and it's like, wow, where'd that come from?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of fun. You're like, oh, that was pretty good.
I know.
You gotta write that. Yeah, there it is. Like, I know I couldn't remember the whole quote, but it's like when she's realizing, so Alex, the main character, she's in the hospital with her friend, and she's realizing for real that something horrible is going on at the complex, and she says, the earlier sense of foreboding peeled itself off of Alex's shoulders and slithered down. The earlier sense of foreboding peeled itself off of Alex's shoulders and slithered down to her abdomen, cleaving a cold hollow in the pit of her stomach. So that was one of my favorites. Yeah.
That's good.
And
Yeah,
then,
good one.
I have another question, Joanna, just in terms of the crafting. Did you end up self-publishing this book or did you find a publisher?
I was almost ready to self-publish, but I found a publisher in the end, a small publisher. Yeah, but I had searched forever.
And how did you handle, you talked about leaving out, after just kind of self-editing, you left out a lot of the science portion because it was too dark and too heavy and blah, blah, blah. But did you pretty much edit before sending the book in yourself? Or did you have, like, did Alice look at it? I mean, I'm just kind of interested in the editing of a writing.
Editing process.
Mhm.
Like I had said, I'd gotten some critiques, at conferences and stuff, and not of the whole book. Well, but of a portion of it. So then I kind of was learning what to wean out. I did most, all of the thinking through things on my own. I had a beta reader that I, got some feedback from her about what to change or not change. I had gotten some feedback from an editor who read the whole thing, but it was a pretty, kind of more of a skim through, and it was more of a, stylistically stuff, like you have to watch, your apostrophes, or you have to watch certain phrases. It wasn't as much a meat of the content of it.
Yeah.
And in the process, it was a long process to try to find somebody. That's why I almost self-published, and I would go through it and submit it, and I'd get requests for partials and requests for fulls, but then nothing. And I think it's a hard book to place. Like, where does it really fit? Like, it's not just a thriller. Is it a science thriller? Is it a medical thriller? Is it a paranormal thriller? I think there's some of the agents and publishers want something that neatly fits into a box, and it didn't neatly fit. So I ended up finding a small publisher that was willing to blur the lines, and they don't do, they do editing for sure, but they don't do a lot of, when you get with a big publisher, they chop it up and it becomes a different story. Yeah, they don't do that. So they kind of keep it was pretty much the same story when they were done with it.
Oh, thanks.
Tell us a little bit more about your choice with the multiple point of views, where everything was a lot of multiple point of views, even with secondary characters, and using the close third.
Right. And I thought about first person because I think that would have been easier for me to do, and certainly more intense for character development for Alex, but I didn't feel like I could get all of the angles in that I wanted. There's so much information from different people's perspectives that I wanted to capture. So that's why, for me, it was like a segue. I used to get annoyed by books. I like multiple points of view, and I know some people don't, but I would get annoyed when I would read a book and it would start it would jump you into a new point of view, but you didn't really know anything about who they were. It was totally out of the blue, like you hadn't even heard their name before, or you weren't really. So I wanted to sort of have segues, like at least have a character introduced or mentioned or know who that person is before I went into their point of view. And it was easy. I mean, just writing that though, sometimes it's just so easy to forget whose point of view you're in, and you're in the middle of a chapter and I'm writing it from Alex's perspective, and then I throw in something that Carl would know. It's like, oh, darn it. Like I wasn't supposed to do that. That's just hard. That was hard to keep track of. Yeah.
Who was your favorite point of view character to write?
I really liked writing, again, it's the disturbing part, but I did like writing like Carl at the end when he's in the hospital. And I liked writing how that worked out. I mean, how it didn't work out for him, but I liked writing how it ended up working out for him too. I enjoyed that part. And I think I enjoyed also writing Alex's ending, like what happens to her towards the end. I don't want to give any spoilers necessarily. I don't know if I can or I'm supposed to, so I just won't, but like.
You can, it's totally okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so she ends up having her own accident, maybe not even an accident, but either way, she ends up having her own experience. And like, so being able to describe that first person where I did that a little bit with Carl, but like, since she was the main character that had been the main character that had been in the story the whole time, definitely could reveal more intensity in terms of what it was like to have that happen to her. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was something I wasn't expecting at all, but it seemed like she was the balance of the force in the universe.
Exactly. Right. Could provide some support, right? Which could, I think, tie into future books, like as long as they're together, right? It'll be okay they'll be a little bit more stable if they have each other.
Yeah, and it was, the whole thing of everything is also not perfect at the end. They're still managing, and I thought that was very realistic.
Okay, good. Right. Like it'll struggle, but better, but a struggle.
If they're together, that's the.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right, what other questions do y'all have? Oh, Sam, go ahead.
I have one.
Great, thank you.
This is from just a physical bookstore perspective, or from a reader like who thinks this way. Would you shove this under thriller or science fiction, or would you think this would be something that a science fiction reader might be interested in, even if they're not typically a thriller fan?
Right. Like if the bookstore had a category called science thriller, that's where I'd put it. A lot of people don't. So because I have found that people who think it's a thriller are maybe looking for more of a traditional psychological thriller and then aren't prepared for the science parts, right? So I think science fiction, although I don't think of it as science fiction because it's not traditional science fiction either, right? They might be more open to it, and they're not going to be turned off by the science, but I would hope that they would like the action, and that they would like the adventure. So it probably leans more towards science fiction, but I like it housed where I'm trying to think of other, like the Michael Crichton.
Michael Crichton, exactly what I was thinking.
Category. Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. Although, I mean, just to like mention reviews, I was surprised to get this like Book Authority. I don't know if anyone's heard of Book Authority, but so I mean, I have like, if I screen share, I have their little lists there. They rank books, and they have been supposedly quoted by CNN and Forbes and all these places, and they recommend books and they rank books, but they don't take requests from publishers and they don't take requests from authors. They just formulate all this together on their own, right? And so they included my book on their Book Authority list for the number 2, like the best 13 new thrillers of 2020. And I think it was the number 2 thriller, right? I don't even know how they found me. Somehow they like figured it out. And then, but in terms of categorization, it was the number 1. I made 2 lists. I'm just so confused by that. I'll have to show you maybe, because just is perplexing to me how I even landed there. Because they give you little emblems and stuff too. It's kind of cool. But anyway, the #1 crime book. So like, I don't know, would you stick it on the crime shelf? Okay. I mean, crimes happen, but like, yeah.
Joanna,
Thanks.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was just curious, did you find that this was a cathartic experience for you, especially being in psychology and therapy and whatnot? Did you find that going to the darker recesses of our, shadow side?
Yeah, right. And I think we have to own that. Like, everybody's got dark sides.
Yes.
Certainly, again, you want to not practice portraying good behavior and good things and good energy. But I mean, to not acknowledge that people don't have dark thoughts or is unrealistic, I think. But it's just what you can do with it in a healthy way, right? And it did feel, that finishing it is like there's a sense of relief or decompression or something. Yep.
Yeah, but particularly the darker sides, did you find that was kind of a release of any of your frustration or anger or anything in general?
Oh yeah, it could have been for sure, right? I mean, I didn't really think about it, but maybe, right? It does give you a healthy outlet for venting some things that you wish you think about but aren't going to really do, right? And it's in righting some wrongs and taking charge of situations that are uncontrollable or not good for other people. And yeah, that gives you good control over your own little universe in a positive, healthy way. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to I never would want to write anything that was remotely realistic to my real job. Like, I just felt like that would be too close, and I wouldn't want to accidentally throw some realistic client stuff. It's just my own personal, I wouldn't want to, I know people do that, but I wouldn't want to ever profit off of somebody else's pain. So everything's all made up completely.
Joanna, how long did it take for you to write the draft?
So I had years because I had to figure out how to write at all, right? How to write decently at all, like kind of hone that skill because I hadn't written anything since college. So it had been a long time. And then even what goes into a novel in terms of character development and plotting and story arcs. And then even if you know what you're doing, there's so many drafts. So, and it started out as one story and then it changed to another story. And like originally when I first got the idea, I was like, oh, I'll write a children's book on particle physics so kids will be able to relate to particle physics more. And then I started writing, I'm like, ooh, this will never be a child's book. Stuff just came out. Whoops.
Not made for kids. I was going to say, if, let's see, we've got, looking back here on the gallery, any other questions? Your questions are oh so awesome, friends.
They are good.
Sam has another question. Yeah, go ahead, Sam. No, he doesn't have.
I was just saying, thanks so much for bringing your book to us. It was really fascinating to hear. I look forward to my copy coming. And but I have to run. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, okay. Bye, Sam.
Right. Bye. Thanks, Alice, for inviting me in.
Yeah, absolutely. Come back next time.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.
Alice, I sent you a question in the chat. I'm in a place that is really loud. So would you mind asking the question?
Yeah, I'll ask the question. So Tim wanted to know if there was a different process. Tim is a novelist, and he is going to be one of our guests next year in 2021 for his novel, Jesus' Brother James, and that's coming up. You'll see that on the list soon. But so he's an experienced novelist and also a screenwriter. So he wanted to know what if the process was different, and I want to make sure that I said that question right. Hold on. Hold on. Is there a mental place you go to that differs from writing your thriller, and a different mental place that you go to for writing your screenplay?
Yes, they were a good chunk of time apart. Like, you know, Sinai Unhinged was finished and under contract with the publisher when I decided to write the screenplay. And it was definitely a different place. It was kind of like watching the Hallmark Channel going, I can write one of these, you know, like kind of looking at some of them are pretty like light. They're so light and fluffy. I'm like, I could do better than that. And it was definitely a much happier, fun, like, okay. And as you know from Sinai, like romance is not like, I would not read romance. I'm not really writing romance. Like I just didn't really get into that genre, but I really found writing a romantic holiday screenplay was just fun. Like it was way more fun to do than I expected. But it's definitely a different learning curve because I kind of liked it because you can leave so much out, right? You don't have to like do their inner dialogue and you don't have to do huge details. You have to crunch it into 120 pages or less and brief descriptions, kind of straight to the point, which when I just in general tend to be more straight to the point. So I did like that, but there's like strange formatting that you have to learn. Like, so I got software that would do most of it for me. And so it was definitely a different headspace than writing a novel, and definitely a different emotional space, and partly because there were two totally different genres too. And I'm trying to figure out, I've started like on and off thinking, how would I make Sinai Unhinged into a screenplay? Then what do I cut out, right? Because again, you have to whittle so much. I can totally see why the movies are so different than the books, because you just have to change like the starting point and what you give in the background or don't give in the background. And yeah, it's just like might change the arc of things because you have to make things happen at a different pace for a screenplay and a different point. It's different. So I'm not sure how, if I was to adapt it to a screenplay, how that would work out. It would almost feel like I'd be writing a different novel, but you do, it was a different headspace, but I like screenwriting. I'm on a second holiday Christmas movie one that I started in the middle of the pandemic because I'm like, well, I got time on my hands because at first no clients were coming in even by telehealth, like the world just froze and nobody was doing anything. So I started another screenplay.
Yeah, actually, I write my screenplay first because it's my outline. Because everything's cut out. Yeah,
so, that right.
It's easier to write the screenplay first and then go back and write the novel.
You're right. You can just go fill it in, right?
Yeah, you can slow it down, fill it in, go off on side subplots, which the screenplay may not allow.
Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
It did. I'm always just curious because I meet a lot of writers and many of them have a hard time adjusting back to screenplays. So I was just curious if you have that ability. A lot of folks don't like to do that, so it's nice to hear that you actually like to do both.
I did. Yeah.
Cool. Other questions for Joanna? Thank you, Tim.
One of my other inspirations was, Gary Zukav wrote like Seed of the Soul. Those Seed of the Soul books are really popular. But before that, he wrote this book called The Dancing Woolly Masters, and it's a book all about particle physics, but in a little bit more relatable way. I say little bit because it's still like kind of really deep, but it's just interesting. I think that was like his spin-off point for perhaps the Seed of the Soul books. And so it's really kind of cool if you want some deep thinking,
Joanna, would you like to read a passage from Sinai Unhinged for us, a short chapter?
Yes, I can do that. So I think it might be, so it's going to be 6 pages, right? So it's the opening scene. I think it'll be like 10 to 15 minutes-ish time-wise. Okay, so this is the cover. I don't know if people saw the cover. I should probably show people. This is what the book looks like. And I went and got like cheesy, like I got a coffee mug. I even got like, we were going to Magic Kingdom and Disney a lot and Epcot Center and all that. And we even got like a little backpack with Sinai Unhinged on the backpack because I want all the people that are at the park to sort of see. Just a cheesy advertisement I thought I'd share. Alex scanned the room. The setup is this is Alex, the therapist, the main character. She's in the hospital and she's talking with one of the patients who's one of the victims of the accident at the particle physics complex. The very first one. Alex scanned the room, little more than a small hard box set aside to interview the riskier patients of Sinai General. And then she looked back at her patient, her last session of the day. He wore a crumpled smock, a waxy complexion, and the panic look of a crime victim certain his attacker would return in his sleep. There, that's what I saw before. It's starting again, Austin said, nodding toward the corner of the room. Alex saw nothing but a sterile clinic room floor and a few dust bunnies. It's okay, Austin, you're safe here, she said, watching as he groped to clench the table, knuckles white, trembling spread through his body, rattling the table legs upon the tattered linoleum. Alex set her hands on the metal surface. The added weight quieted the din. Her fingertips inched away from his injured forearm. Excuse me. Gauze bandages concealed poker-sized burns, thin cables from the core of a particle detector. The monstrous machine resurrected at the old physics lab had pierced this man's flesh. Not long after, he lost touch with reality. Another reckless experiment. Don't you see it, he said, his breath shallow, his spiky energy almost contagious. Alex leaned in, trying to catch his twitching eyes. See what? Tell me. They're always happening, he said, his voice rising as he ramped his large body up into a wicked fast rock, forward and backwards. Built stocky, athletic, and solid like a pit bull, Austin dwarfed the creaky wooden chair. I know you're scared, but you're at Sinai General, the psychiatric unit, and you're safe. You don't believe me, he spat, spittle spraying from his lips, eyes darting in circles, then pressing closed into a tight set of wrinkles. Shaking his head, he grabbed the sides of his chair, rocking and mumbling incoherently, muddling any chance of comprehension. Her stomach shrunk at the sight of him slipping, so in need of firm ground. This morning at the complex, you said people said you seemed fine. The experiment you were working on was running smoothly, and there was a problem until there was a problem in the counting room. Austin cringed, rocking and mumbling. They said you went in, and when you came out, you were hurt, holding your arm. You ran under your desk, and when your friends tried to help, you attacked them and ran into a closet. They wouldn't come with me, he said, sounding a bit like a rejected schoolboy. No, they wouldn't, but you tried. You tried to pull them in with you, but they fought you off. And you were saying, watch out, it's coming. What's coming? Austin tilted his head back and rolled his blood red eyes toward the ceiling. Things splitting wide open, hot as blazes. Was I supposed to just sit there and fry? Sit there and fry, not again. The words all too closely resembled the half-baked comments that flowed from her father's lips just before he'd pull one of his vanishing acts. Between bouts of insanity, her father had often spoke of his work in particle physics. Really, he talked to her about little else. And to be honest, even when he spoke physics fact, it more often than not sounded fiction. After he left for the last time, science ceased to be meaningful. Many things ceased to be meaningful. He'd left a hole greater than she'd speak of, a cavity dark, deep, and preferably dormant. Through it all, Alex had become intimate with the workings of particle accelerators, enough to know that Austin's workstation would have been far removed from the accelerator or detector sites. No, of course not. But what do you mean things split wide open? The rocking and mumbling resumed. Alex sank back into her chair, not entirely sure she should proceed. Then she shuffled her chair closer to the panic button just in case. Tell me more, Austin. Her patient mumbled louder, nonsense words, seemingly a tune designed to quell his thoughts. What you saw at the complex is the same thing here now? Alex strained her ears. Let me just preface, like, I would not be doing any of this. Like, I would be not alone. I would be not pushing him, but I just wanted to like insert that. It's not the kind of therapist I have. I am, just so you know. So when you were at the complex, is the same thing here now? Alex strained her ears, trying to decipher his murmurs, repetitive sounds, almost chants. Sifting through the verbal rubble, she caught a word: cracking. Before she could respond, Austin broke free from his self-soothing trance, flew to his feet, and flipped the interview table on its side as he shouted, "Go!" Alex lurched for the panic button. Her fingertips brushed it as Austin grabbed her wrists and yanked her shoulders snapping. He slung her to the ground behind the table, momentum sliding her body across the floor. Austin landed on her before she could scream, the forceful jolt emptying her lungs of air. Her chest heaved, painful labors, struggling for oxygen. Only a raspy wheeze escaped. Needles stabbed as she twisted for comfort and breath. "Get off me," she choked, squirming and pushing under his weight. "Shh," Austin whispered as he covered her mouth with his hands. Alex's eyes flew wide open. "He's suffocating me. God damn it, this can't be happening." She turned her head, but Austin overpowered her. His icy hands gripped her jaw closed. The back of her skull pressed to the cold, hard ground. Her heart pounded, her body shook with adrenaline, and in the distance, the intercom crackled. "Code yellow, interview room 4. Staring at ceiling tiles through blurred and watery eyes, she forced her lungs to accept any wisp of air they could find. Alex's faint breath pushed against Austin's palm, then hotly back into her face. But gaps slipped between his fingers and air reached her lips. After what seemed like an eternity, her chest loosened. With strength renewed, Alex let loose a gravelly, partially muffled wail. He blocked her cry with a forearm across her teeth, and in return, she bit hard. Pretty sure she wasn't supposed to bite her patients, probably an ethics violation of some sort. On instinct, she crunched down, a break in the skin prevented only by his muslin sleeve. Alex grunted, "Shit." The chomp was enough of a surprise to knock him off balance. Alex rammed her knee between his legs. "Geez, I'll lose my license for sure." And in a jerky, frantic chest press motion, thrust his concrete bulk off of her. She scrambled away, sizing up her location. Austin sat curled up on the floor between her and the door, blocking her exit with an almost comical look on his face. Eyebrows askew, mouth half open, and in obvious pain, he continued to scan the room's corners. Whatever Austin saw was real to him. Whatever Austin saw terrified him. His eyes made that clear, as if he'd entered the same oblivion her father had during his fits many years before. Cracking. Maybe Austin meant he was about to crack up. Maybe when he said go, he was ordering her to leave. Alex had pushed him too far, endangering them both in the process. Damn it, where the hell are the texts? Then his face softened, and he whispered, "I think it's done." Alex shifted her weight, sidling toward the door until he rose and stood over her. She stopped and met his eyes, ready to shoulder tackle his belly at the slightest hint of agitation. Instead, she saw eyes, soft and warm. "You stay here." He held one hand above her head as he spoke, as if she were a puppy and he the trainer. Something about Austin's gentle command struck her as peculiar, almost protective. Before Alex could disobey and run for the door, Austin turned and darted, startling and confusing her with his clumsy escape. He might get to the annex hall if he was lucky, but before the solid doors of the locked ward stopped him. Odder still, Austin ran toward the wall. She lurched forward, shouting no. Whatever Austin's destination, he never made it. 2 men, one young and one tattooed, burst through the door, at least feigning the appearance that they were rushing to her aid. She rushed between the two, and like tag team wrestlers, they spaced themselves far enough apart to each hook one of their arms through one of Austin's arms. In a swift motion, they picked him up and brought him down, legs still running midair. Let me go. A red-haired man and a familiar face, a powerful petite woman, quickly followed in, working to form a 4-point restraint. Austin's heavy limbs were flat while his midsection thrashed for freedom. Twist so violent, he risked breaking his back. I have to go, he bellowed. Easy, you're not going anywhere, the tattooed tech replied. You're all right now, Lena said, shifting her weight to better press down one of Austin's convulsing arms. One of her closest friends, Lena, reminded Alex of a brunette Tinkerbell, right down to the pixie hairdo, her voice a gentle whisper, contrary to the stiff force she applied to keep his arm pinned to the floor. Alex scrambled to Austin's shoulders and pushed his thick mass down hard, enjoying the mastery over her attacker a bit too much. As the shock wore off, whatever could have happened, how bad things could have gotten, punched Alex in the gut. Thankfully, a sense of safety and comfort radiated from Lena, and she latched onto that to dissipate the panic. To Alex, she felt like home. Austin's body softened, tears welled in his eyes. Austin, a PhD 20 years her senior, crumbled, lips trembling. It's all right, I'm all right. They're gone now. His breathing slowed and he laid quietly, eyes closed, muscles no longer resisting the pressure of the restraint. The room's silence interrupted only by the steady tick of a clock. Suddenly, the door crashed open, hard and fast, the glass rattling in its frame. A stocky nurse stumbled into the room, nearly tripping over the tattooed tech. Austin's eyes flew open, his breath hitched, and he looked around with furrowed brows of confusion. His handlers tightened the hold on his limbs as he began to squirm. The nurse grabbed the doorknob for support and regained her balance. Agitation spread across her face as she raised her arm, a glistening needle poised in one hand. Lena gritted her teeth. Edmonds, please, can you put that away? Eyeing the needle, Austin growled and began thrashing harder than ever, hips slapping the floor. Lips pursed tight, Edmonds ignored Lena and walked to an open space next to Austin's jerking legs. He cursed and wailed as the nurse approached. It's ordered PRN and this patient is obviously out of control. Look at him. He's flailing like a rabid animal. Watch what you say, Edmonds. He can hear you. He had calmed down before you walked in, Alex said in slight disbelief that she was actually defending him. Edmonds shrugged. He doesn't look calm to me. The nurse crouched next to Austin's thigh, noise issuing from either her crisp white scrubs pressed as rigid as she or her dry, brittle bones. Austin's fit gained strength. Terror blackened his eyes. No, don't stick me. I can't get away when they come back. Edmonds grappled for Austin's moving thigh, seized his pant leg and pushed it high enough to expose sinewy muscle above the knee. She held Austin's legs down with an arm surprisingly powerful for her advanced age and stabbed the needle through top muscle. The nurse's sallow complexion flushed with color as she touched his flesh, as if touching him forced circulation through the otherwise barren landscape of her heart. And Edmonds' touch electrified Austin. With a surge of power from his core, Alex lost her grip. As he propelled his upright body, the front of his skull headbutting Edmonds' right temple. She toppled over, revealing a scarlet handprint upon Austin's thigh. Amidst the chaos, Alex clawed Austin back down, dimly noting the mark, not recalling it reflected in his chart. Edmonds landed on her hips, legs flailing out to the side, struggling to keep the needle high. Alex bit back a giggle. Raising her voice over Austin's wails, Edmonds hoisted herself vertical and walked to the door. Don't put your ass on the line again, Kraig. It's not worth it. No patient is ever worth it. Her skin crawled. Edmonds disgusted her, but on her lowest, most shameful days, Alex worried that Edmonds was right, that not enough could ever be done, that maybe all of her work really wasn't worth it. Lena crouched next to her, semi-smiled and shoulder bumped a cozy hello. Alex appreciated it. Lena said, ignore old rat ass. Are you okay? Alex nodded. Austin's flesh softened beneath her. Relief washed over her as his moans faded and the drug took hold. Eyelids heavy and body limp. Lena stared at the motionless man on the floor, seemingly lost in thought. Alex nudged her, and Lena's eyes shook free. Well, maybe this guy will be able to tell us what's in the water over there, she said. Alex cocked her head to one side, her brain thick with confusion. The other guy died too fast, Lena said. The words slid through her brain like mud. The other guy, what are you talking about? Bryn, he worked at the complex too. It's so weird, Alex. It's like something's going on over there, but you know Carl, he won't tell me a thing. Jeremy Bryn. Alex had been on vacation when he died. She and the medical director, Carson Briggs, were meeting with the state investigator tomorrow. She released Austin's shoulders and scooted back, the text taking over, shuffling him upright. Her overloaded head spun heavy with thought. Though she loved her friends, she couldn't think about them right now. Carl's loyal to his job, but if there was something bad going on, he'd let you know, Lena, don't worry. Well, I am worried. Lena must have seen the tired look in Alex's eyes as her tone changed. Sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned it. I've got to get back to my unit. You're all right. You are all right, right? Lena nodded, or Alex nodded, and Lena rubbed Alex's arms and scurried from the room. Like a brother to her during the darkest periods of her life, Alex had known Carl, a wannabe nurse clothed in science fatigue, even longer than Lena had. He was also loyal to a fault and so perpetually optimistic it was diagnosable. Alex didn't have the energy to say it, but she doubted Carl would pick up on a bad thing unless it bit him. Still kneeling on the floor and feeling a bit numb, Austin watched as the techs dragged a groggy and disoriented Austin back to his room. Faint murmurings from the patients and the staff echoed outside in the hallway, the white hallway. All the halls of Sinai General were white, cold, stark, and lifeless white. So, okay. Oh, thank you. I never like, is that too long? I don't know. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. And I had a quick question, comment. It's after finishing the book and then hearing all the foreshadowing in the first chapter, because I didn't have time to go back to the first chapter and reread, but all the elements are there of what's going on, and in the control room, it says something bit him. I'm like,
I know the bit.
But yeah,
Unless
yeah, I mean, it's just scary how how quick you have these smart people, and they all have the same job, and the accident just renders them very savage and very Lord of the Flies and instinctual and just emotion, and it's degrading them. And I also wanted to know, like, a little technical question: how far away is the complex from the hospital?
Oh, that's a good question, right? I mean, it's within the same city, but or county, but kind of far enough. Like, maybe, I really thought about it. I mean, I would say between 10 and 20 miles. I mean, like a drivable distance, it's kind of like maybe opposite sides of the county, like Wake Forest to Garner, or Apex or something like that, or just a little bit far. I mean, it's like within a reasonable distance, short drive. Yep.
Yeah, and it's a major, sounds like the pretty major employer for the small town.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm working with a client on mines, and so I'm getting to know a lot of mining and mineralogy than I thought I'd know ever. But this was out in Utah with mines, and there's mines in China and Russia and Venezuela and Argentina, and it's really scary. You go down in the earth, and there's so many problems that can take place. With instability and so I was just thinking, it's like they're really deep. I mean, and it is scary because bad things, my client had, he had experienced, some failures. He was in when there were mine collapses, and he's seen things, and over his 39 years of career with that company. But so I'm like this. I just saw a lot of foreshadowing at the beginning.
I know, right. And when you think about, I have a little 5 or 6 minute video about what a particle, I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to see it, but like what a particle accelerator is and like how the detectors, like the layout of it. Because when you see it, and there's so, not only is it like hundreds of feet underground, but they're so gigantic. I mean, just so gigantic. Like the accelerator ring is like, they give it in kilometers, but it's like 16 3/4 miles long that they're, you know, and then the detectors are like several stories high where humans are just dwarfed. So you have the immensity of the energies that they're working with, and then the hugeness of the machines, and then the underground factor. It's like spooky. I don't know, but good for them. Glad somebody can do it.
Exactly. Hey, I think that'd be a great idea to show the video. But before we do, let's take a couple of group pictures since we have everybody
sure.
here, and then their screens are, everyone's screens is here. Before anyone had to leave, Tim had to leave, and Sam had to leave, so we just have a few. All right, big smiles. All right, hopefully that captured all our smiles. Yeah, are you able to run the video, Joanna?
I can. Let me share my screen. And then, oh, okay. So I guess I click this. And then, am I sharing it? Yes. Okay.
You're sharing. Yeah, you're sharing. You got it.
Here it is. So the cover of my book is a particle detector, and the accelerator is the ring that goes around. And I only clarify that because they make kind of like I guess it's supposed to be kind of a lame joke in the beginning, but if you don't know the difference, you might not get the lame. So I'm just pointing that out. So, but otherwise this is from CERN.
Okay.
The Large Hadron Collider. It's a massive, beautiful piece of human ingenuity, engineering, and wait a minute, that's not the LHC. This is the LHC. This is the Large Hadron Collider, or LHC for short. It's a 27-kilometer particle accelerator sitting under the border of France and Switzerland. Smasher, the biggest in the world, designed and built by thousands of engineers, scientists, and mathematicians from across our tiny planet with the goal of helping other scientists learn about things of incredibly small size by smashing them together. These smashings are called collisions.
This is really all they're interested in.
Yeah.
They're interested in collisions, collisions, collisions.
That's Mike Lamont. He's the operations group leader working on the LHC. It's his job to run beam. Beam being nerdy lingo for bunches of hydrogen protons that fill up the LHC. The LHC is a ring containing two beams going in opposite directions. But if we look closer, that beam is actually made up of bunches of protons.
In fact, each bunch has about 100 billion protons each. And these bunches are about 30 centimeters long, typically about 1 millimeter dimensions as they're going around the ring. And so think about a long, thin, tapered piece of spaghetti.
Incredibly powerful superconducting magnets keep the beams flying at nearly the speed of light with the aim of making these proton bunches hit.
We pass these thin hairs through each other and we get about 30 collisions. So most of the protons just miss each other and they carry on around the ring. They come back one turn later and they can do it again.
And the reason why they miss each other is because atoms are mostly empty space. So getting them to collide is incredibly difficult. It would be like standing 10 kilometers apart and trying to shoot two needle-thin arrows at each other so they hit halfway. So the key is to do this a lot.
The target this year, just to put it in context, is about 800 million collisions a second. So we really we have to work hard to get that rate.
Hundreds of millions per second is insane. Imagine trying to control a proton traveling at nearly the speed of light. To keep the bunches on track, the LHC uses dipole magnets, or two magnets. But when they need to steer the protons, they use quadrupole magnets, or four, one on each compass point, applying 300 to 400 metric tons of force per meter.
So we take our pieces of spaghetti and focus them down with very strong quadrupole magnets, something like lenses, to get them down to the diameter of a human hair as we pass them through each other in the center of the experiments.
And that is why the LHC is in the business of collisions. The LHC is sort of like your power company, but instead of providing electricity, they're generating collisions. More collisions, more better. They spend all their effort to try and get these bunches of hydrogen ions to hit inside of other scientists' experiments. Of course, having a collision is great, but if a proton collides in the woods and no one's there, does it make a boson? Who knows? The scientists still have to be watching at just the right fraction of a second to discover a new particle. That's where these experiments come in. They sit on the LHC ring at collision points, and they're probably what you think of when you hear Large Hadron Collider. The famous ones are ATLAS and CMS, which spotted the famous Higgs boson back in 2013.
It's called CMS, compact muon solenoid. However, it really is not compact. It's a relative term. As you can see, nothing of that size is compact.
Dr. Talika Bose sits in the control room of the CMS waiting for an exciting collision to happen inside her 3-story science experiment, all thanks to the LHC.
So they collide about 25 nanoseconds. So you have a bunch colliding with another bunch. You may have a proton here and a proton here, which has a hard, what we call scattering, a hard event. And out of that comes out a whole mess of particles.
This is what she's talking about. When two protons collide, it looks like this. To you and me, this may look like a whole mess of particle parts, but to Dr. Bose, this mess can actually tell you what's inside a proton.
There are two important pieces of information that we get from this. One is whether it's curving this way or if it's curving that way. That tells us whether it's positively charged or negatively charged. And then how large is the radius of curvature? Because it could be curving like this, or it could be curving in a much larger radius. And this has a direct relationship with essentially what the velocity and consequently what the momentum of the particle is.
And this is why the LHC is awesome. Dr. Bose is basically watching millions of proton car crashes in order to reverse engineer the automobile. Smashing atoms together can reveal what they're made of. But instead of injectors, plastic, steel, and glass, physicists find neutrons, kaons, pions, muons, and neutrinos. By the way, physicists call particles that are made of these things hadrons, hence the name Large Hadron Collider. Proton collisions like these help physicists reveal exactly what these tiny structures that make up our universe are made of. The technology is super advanced, but the science is the same as it's always been. We simply break things apart, hoping to understand how they tick. Before we went to the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, we were on top of planet Earth, 800 miles from the North Pole at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. To find out what awesome science we were doing there, check out this video.
I can't find it.
You know, this is quite simply a hole in the mountain. In there,
Where did
you
that
have
go?
actually
Why is it like-
13,000 years history of agriculture.
Okay, now I'm having technical difficulties. Sorry, people. Hopefully it just stops.
Yeah.
Because like the video, I stopped sharing, but then it took away the whole everything.
I was at school. The principal told me that I had to.
You don't want to hear that.
I think you're good.
Let me share again.
You're not sharing, so I think if you, I think you just have to
Oh,
close
there it
your browser without.
Oh, no, okay, I got it. It
Yeah.
just popped up. Like the whole, when I stopped sharing, it took it away from me too. Like you stopped seeing it, but I stopped seeing it too. So I'm like, I can't stop the video because
I know. You did it like a pro. Wow, that did help. And then you described it very well in the book about how how large this machine is.
Well, it shows you like the beam tunnel that she was trapped in, or the scatter plots that they were looking at, or just the computer screens that the scientists would look at when they're running the experiment. Yeah.
Very well researched, Joanna. So thank you all so much. Well, I thought this would be a good time. I think we're nearing the end of our fabulous discussion with Joanna, but we can hang out a little bit. Anybody else have any questions for Joanna on the official book schedule? Speak now.
Thank you all. I had a question for Gerald. I wanted that prayer again, just to remember. I know it was short but sweet.
Absolutely. I had to write it down because my instructions from the gentleman that became my exorcist was to repeat it 3 times and then do that 3 times a day. I overdid that quite a bit. I was pretty frightened at the time.
I'm in.
So, yeah. the wording is, in the name of Jesus Christ and the power of God Almighty, get behind me.
Oh, okay. God almighty. I knew there was another part I missed. Okay.
I would just like to comment, before I worked in that high energy physics lab, I was a psychiatric aide at Dorothy Dix Hospital. That was in 1970.
It was like all about your life.
1970.
Wow.
1970. I hate to tell you how far back your description of that wrestling match took me.
Oh, wow.
And how completely accurate. You've had some rotations, obviously, in your training in a psychiatric facility, and hopefully it didn't happen quite the way you described it when you had a crisis situation. But oh my God, I spent a year and a half in therapy after I left there. I was only there for 6 months. It's for all patient care forever and a day. So of course, I'm now a retired registered nurse, right?
Oh, good for you. Yeah, right. Well, I did think about Dick's because I used to go in, although I did outpatient treatment, sometimes my clients would end up at Dick's. So I was there quite frequently back when it was a hospital. And that's the place that I kept in mind when, when I was writing.
Yeah. Very familiar, disturbingly familiar, I'm sorry to say. And congratulations on how accurately you described that. Ah, dear God.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Cool. I mean, not cool, but
interesting.
Yes, I mean, I love how we can, folks in our group can totally relate to. I mean, and Gerald is a longtime book club member, so all our connections again, it goes back to the universal Carl Jung, and I love how Denise, referring from a book we read a couple years ago, and I love those connections. I mean, it's wonderful how long we've, this group has been together, and we've grown as a family, and we love to have new folks that came in today. So a lot of new folks that showed up today, and it's always wonderful. We want to expand our family. So, and your contributions are always valuable. Well, if anybody doesn't have anything else, I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you all so much. Our next book is don't go away yet, but our next book is going to be Leslie Tall Manning's Knock on Wood. This is the cover of the book. It's also available on Kindle and at Quail Ridge Books. Our discussion will take place 10 a.m. Friday, December 4th. That's 3 weeks from now. I suggest start reading the book. It's 400 some pages, so get going on it, kids. All right, so and that goes for me too. So I like to wait to the end. But thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.